Why avoidants can't escape the bond with a super empath, even after leaving. Here's the truth most people never tell you about avoidant partners and the so-called super empath they walked away from. Avoidants don't actually escape that bond. They distance themselves from the relationship, yes, but not from the imprint it leaves on their nervous system, their emotional memory, and their sense of self. That connection doesn't disappear just because they shut the door. It lingers quietly, resurfacing in moments of loneliness, emotional dysregulation, or when they meet someone new who doesn't feel the same. And to understand why, you have to understand what made that bond different from every other connection they've had. A super empath doesn't love lightly. They don't attach for entertainment, validation, or ego. They attach through attunement. They feel beneath the surface. They sense unspoken emotions, notice micro shifts in mood, and respond with presence rather than control. For an avoidant, someone whose nervous system learned early that closeness equals danger, this kind of love is profoundly destabilizing. Not because it's bad, but because it's unfamiliar. It bypasses the avoidance defenses instead of fighting them. It offers safety without demand, intimacy without invasion. And once an avoidant experiences that level of emotional attunement, their system records it as something rare. Even if their conscious mind tries to minimize or rationalize it away, avoidants survive by disconnecting from emotional intensity. They intellectualize feelings. They compartmentalize experiences. They convince themselves that what they felt wasn't that deep, or that the empath was too much. But here's the paradox. The very reason they label the bond as overwhelming is because it reached places nothing else ever has. A super empath mirrors the avoidant's unprocessed inner world back to them, without judgment. And that's terrifying, because it forces the avoidant to confront emotions they've spent a lifetime suppressing. Longing, grief, vulnerability, and the fear of being truly seen. This is why avoidants often leave suddenly, go cold, or rewrite the story after the relationship ends. It's not because the bond was weak, it's because it was strong in a way they couldn't control. When an avoidant pulls away from a super empath, they're not escaping the bond. They're escaping themselves. They're trying to reestablish emotional equilibrium by returning to distance, independence, and numbness. But the nervous system remembers. The body remembers. And that memory doesn't vanish just because the relationship ends. Over time, something interesting happens. The avoidant meets new people. They date. They flirt. They form surface-level connections that feel safe because they don't go deep. But nothing quite lands the same. Conversations feel thinner. Emotional exchanges feel transactional. There's less resonance, less warmth, less emotional intelligence. And that's when the bond resurfaces. Not as longing at first, but as comparison. The avoidant may not consciously think, I miss them, but their system thinks, something's missing. This is where the super empath becomes psychologically inescapable. Not because the avoidant wants them back, but because the empath redefined what connection felt like. Once you've experienced emotional attunement, you can't unknow it. You can avoid it, suppress it, distract yourself from it, but you can't erase the reference point. The empath becomes the baseline, even in absence. Another reason avoidants can't escape this bond is because super empaths don't chase power. They offer regulation. During the relationship, the empath often served as the emotional stabilizer. They soothed the avoidant's anxiety, grounded their nervous system, and absorbed emotional tension without retaliation. For an avoidant, this creates a subtle form of emotional dependency they don't consciously acknowledge. They may tell themselves they felt smothered, but what they actually lost was emotional containment. And once it's gone, they feel it, especially during stress, failure, or moments when their usual coping strategies stop working. This is also why avoidants often resurface months or even years later. Not necessarily to reconcile, but to check if the empath still exists in the same way. It's a subconscious attempt to re-access that regulation without fully re-entering intimacy. They may send a casual message, a nostalgic comment, or a vague apology. Not because they've healed, but because something inside them remembers where safety once lived. But here's the part most people misunderstand. The bond isn't sustained by contact. It's sustained by contrast. The more the super empath heals, grows, and reclaims their energy, the stronger the imprint becomes in the avoidance mind. Why? Because the empath no longer feels emotionally available in the same way. The absence becomes final, not as abandonment, but as completion. And avoidants struggle deeply with finality when it comes to meaningful emotional bonds. Distance feels safe. Closure does not. The super empath represents a version of connection the avoidant both craves and fears. Someone who saw them clearly without trying to change them. Someone who offered love without leverage. Someone who stayed present through emotional withdrawal until they didn't anymore. That loss hits differently. It's not dramatic, it's quiet. It shows up as restlessness, as dissatisfaction, as a persistent sense that something meaningful slipped through their fingers. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Avoidants often realize the depth of the bond only when it's no longer accessible. Not because they didn't care, but because their emotional processing is delayed. While the empath grieves, reflects, and heals in real time, the avoidant suppresses, distracts, and moves on until the emotional bill comes due. And when it does, the empath is no longer there to soften the impact. This doesn't mean the avoidant will return transformed or ready. It doesn't mean they'll suddenly choose vulnerability. It means the bond becomes a psychological landmark, a quiet reminder of what was possible and what they ran from. The super empath becomes the relationship they compare all others to, even if they never admit it out loud. For the empath, this is where power shifts, not through revenge, not through silence used as punishment, but through genuine detachment. When the empath stops seeking validation, stops waiting to be chosen, and stops centering the avoidant in their emotional world, the bond completes its purpose. It turns from a wound into wisdom. And ironically, that's when the avoidant feels it most. Not as longing, but as respect. Because avoidants don't attach to need. They attach to autonomy. And when the empath becomes whole again, no longer trying to rescue, explain, or hold space, the dynamic changes permanently. And here's the final thing to understand before you leave this video. This isn't about hoping the avoidant realizes what they lost. It's about realizing what you were carrying and choosing not to carry it anymore. The bond mattered. It was real. But it wasn't meant to trap you in waiting or self-doubt. It was meant to wake you up to your depth, your intuition, and your capacity to love without losing yourself. If an avoidant can't face that bond, it doesn't diminish it. It proves how powerful it was. So let them remember in silence if they must. Your job now is to move forward grounded, regulated, and whole. Because when you stop orbiting their avoidance, you step into your own gravity. And that's where peace begins. If this message resonated, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs this clarity today. You're not hard to love. You were simply loving someone who didn't know how to stay.